All right, so let's pick up where we left off, and I want to start by just doing some general styling, and I like to a lot of times start by styling my anchor tags so that, for one thing, I won't forget, and also that the blue and the underline won't start affecting everything else visually that is around the links. So first thing I want to do is come over here, and I want to go to Dreamweaver, and I'm going to go ahead and create some new rules down below the body. And I will make it A, and I'm also going to make the visited state the same. So we'll do the pseudo of visited. So we'll do A and A visited so that they're the same. And I want to give them a color of, and then I can go and I can pick something from the color picker. I actually have a swatch already saved. I'm going to choose this blue color, and it's sort of like a teal aqua kind of color. I'm going to choose that. Don't forget to terminate after adding color. Otherwise, it can mess up your page in a lot of browsers. The other thing I want to do is I want to get rid of the text decoration, right? So we can go to text, and then D, it should pop up, and then I want to say none. I want to get rid of that underline. Don't forget to terminate, okay? And so right off the bat, I could go ahead and save it and test it. Let's do the test real quick, do a refresh, and then it does actually change the colors. All right, but it doesn't give me a hover state. I think having a hover state would be really helpful. So let's go back over here and we'll do an A hover, and we'll do the hover state. And let's do color. And again, I'm going to use this swatch of this sort of slightly burnt orange from my color picker, and go ahead and terminate that. And let's do a test now, and let's make sure that it still works. And it does in fact work. And you might look at this and go, well, you know, some of these are a little bit light colored right here, and we can always go back and change that. I sort of have a plan for the navigation though, so let's, because we're going to put a darker background for the banner up here. And let's look at the banner actually. Actually, before we continue further, there's one thing that I want to do before I get too far, and you'll notice that like so far what we've been doing, these are all pretty general rules that we've got so far. So I want to make sure that I understand in my comments that this is a general section. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this general comment here so that I can see that all the rules that are coming inside this area are general. And I can also get rid of some of these extra spaces because it's easier to read. And for HTML, because I only have one property there, I'm going to just sort of clean it up and make sure that it's easy on one line to read. I don't have to have multiple lines. And then the A and the A hover is probably the same way. So I can just get rid of that and I can have that on one line. Okay, so now it's a little bit more compacted. I think it's a little bit easier to read, at least in my mind it is. And so let's do that. So now the next thing that if we were looking at our source code that we could do is take a peek at how this banner section is. You'll see here I've got a comment that indicates where, you know, the banner section starts and then it ends at the end of the section tag right before this other comment. And I have an ID of banner on this section. And you'll notice on the other sections I don't have any IDs or classes if you were to go through the page and look. And that is because, you know, we could always add those later if it's important, but the banner is critically important because it really is visually different and it represents something different. It's the announcement of the page and it's where the main navigation is. So we need to visually set that aside so that it behaves differently. And this ID is going to make a huge difference in how that works. So you'll notice that we've got a comment here for the banner. I also, in my style sheet, want to go ahead and I'm going to copy this again. I'm going to create a new comment here for banner. Okay. And then we'll know that everything that is in here is the banner. And if I wanted to mimic what's in my code, I could say section banner. And then that way I know that it is the section tag whose ID is actually banner, and this indicates that it's the ID, right? So the first thing I can do actually then is I could go ahead and create a rule for section pound banner. And that would be for the whole thing, right? And if you notice where it says section pound banner, there is no space before this. I've been saying pound, also hash, hashtag, whatever you want to call it. It's called a hash in programming, but there's no space here. If I put a space here, what that would indicate is that some element with an ID of banner was inside of an element called section, but instead you'll notice that it is the section whose ID actually is assigned to banner. So banner's not inside of section, banner is section in this case. So in that case, what you want to do is get rid of that extra space so that you can see that when you type it like this, you understand that this ID, right, because that's a hash, we know it's an ID, this ID is attached to section. Okay, so that's how we're going to know. And now, first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and give it a background color. I'm just going to use shorthand for background, and I'll use the color picker for right now, and I already have something that's queued up here, so I'll use this kind of charcoal color. All right, and then the other thing too that I want to do is I want to give the text a color. So that property for that is actually just called color. I'll go back to the color picker. Again, I've got a version of white queued up. It's not pure white, it's just slightly off white so that it's not too harsh. So we'll stick to that. Don't forget to terminate. Let's save that and let's do a test real quick and see how it looks. Let's do a refresh. And now you can see that the site banner is starting to visually set itself apart. All right, and then of course we make sure that our rollovers still look okay, and you can see now that this blue link color is a lot better. And later we can always change any link colors that don't look good. You know, in here we can always make them a different color if they're not dark enough, they don't have enough contrast to the background color. But we'll see what what our plan is, okay? Okay, and then you know, the next thing I would want to start probably considering is, you know, how to get the H1 and the H2 where I want them, and also how to, you know, wrangle this navigation. So let's look at that. Let's jump back over here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this. Actually, let's do a copy like that. All right, and I'm going to paste it, and then I'm going to put a space because if you look in here, if you look at the way that the H1 is, the H1 is inside of the header, which is inside of section banner. So you want spaces in between the descendants. And, you know, so H1 is a descendant of header, header is a descendant of this, right? So let's go ahead and we'll put a space. And so I said that header was the next descendant, and then H1 was the descendant after that, right? And so now what we can do is go ahead and type some value in. Let's go ahead and do font size, for instance. Font size. And let's just see what happens if we bump this up to 2M. And the thing that I want to point out is this is sort of where you could start making your own decision about a strategy of whether or not you're going to use M's or Rems or whatever. I like to use M's. That's just my thing because I feel like I have a more finite control over every individual section. But if it's really important to you to be able to make cascading global changes, other than the one that I showed you on the, you know, the pixel size for the document, then you might consider a REM strategy. But for my demonstration, most of what I'm going to be doing is in M's. So, and that means the other thing too is probably I'm going to adjust the line height, but right now I'm going to leave that blank, and I do know that I want everything to be uppercase, so I'm going to do text transform like this, and then we'll say uppercase. And it's not capitalized. Remember, capitalized is just an initial cap. All right, we're going to do all uppercase. And let's just start with that. Let's see where that goes. Oh, lastly, I'm also going to do text align center. That's the other thing. For right now, I might change that later, but for right now, we're going to do a text align center. Save that, take a peek. Okay, and then this is a decent size. You might look at that and go, well, it's kind of small. But one of the things I want you to consider is if you close your banner, or excuse me, you close your browser window a little bit, I want you to start thinking about things in a mobile view. We are going to start designing in mobile view first, and then we can write media queries later so that as we get bigger, we could make the type bigger or whatever. But the idea is that let's start designing first in a mobile view, and the reason for that are manyfold. One is that for one thing, it's becoming more and more of a trend of the way that people design now, especially for really, really large websites, because um, that is one of the harder views to actually design for. You don't have as many kind of choices, I guess, and it's harder to figure out what the hierarchy is going to be in limited real estate. And so you have to make harder decisions first. And it really is important to make those organizational decisions before you start making some really grandiose desktop layout. And then later you sort of get stuck and you have to undo some of the things that you did. Also, there are some other reasons that it makes sense. If you do mobile first design from the get-go, then you're also, for instance, going to potentially be loading smaller images and background images and things like that. And then as you get larger, you can make media queries that once you hit a certain larger size, that you load the bigger picture. If you do it the other way around, then what happens is that someone on a phone is going to load the desktop picture, and then they hit a smaller media query, and then on top of the big picture, then they have to also load down into their browser the smaller picture. But if you're on a phone and you never go over a certain size, you'll never even load that larger background image, for instance. So there's some different reasons to do it this way. And you want to also, always be able to make sure that you know what is going to be visible with the fold. This thing at the bottom here is called the fold. Anywhere on a phone or tablet or desktop where the page ends, and that comes from whenever we used to have a fold on a newspaper. Anything below the fold a lot of times is what people will not read. And so it's important to not put anything that's super important too far down the page because it might not get seen. Okay, so let's sort of start from this point, and one of the things that we could really stand to have is some padding around here. I could put the padding directly on the H1. That would be one option. Another option is that I could put padding inside of the entire container. Let's take a look and see what that would do. Right, if I wanted to put padding here, there's some different strategies, right? I could say padding is going to be, let's just say 1M all the way around, right? And then what ends up happening here, if I hit refresh, is that everything gets bumped. And you might be okay with that. Now the problem with that is that my plan for this navigation right now is not to keep it in a vertical orientation. It's actually so that I can make it float horizontally side by side. And so padding there might not serve me well. It actually might not be good because I might not want the padding to scoot it over there. So I'm going to actually get rid of that on the banner, but that way you can sort of start to see what happens with it. And instead I'm going to say that I want the padding. Right now, I just want to do, well, let's just do padding all the way around. So that's fine. And padding is going to be shorthand instead of padding left, padding right, padding and top, padding bottom. So this is shorthand. And so shorthand, if you remember from other classes, hopefully, is that it goes in clockwise orientation. So the first value is going to be top, and just like on a clock, the next value would be right, and then bottom, and then left. So it can hold up to 4 values. So if we want the top padding, let's say that we want it to be 1M for the top, and then maybe on the right side we want 0, and on the bottom, let's say we also maybe want 0, and then on the left side we want 0. Well, one of the things that we can do, since the bottom and the left and right are all 0, we could have 3 positions, and that tells me that the top position is the first position still, and then we have bottom and left and right. So let's save that, take a quick peek, do a refresh. All right, I'm happier with the way that that looks, so I think I'll be okay with that. And we can also go ahead and do this H2 now. And so one of the things that we could do is we could just copy some of this, and let's go down here, it's paste. Don't know why my copy is not working. Okay, so we're going to copy that All right, and then instead of it being H1, let's say H2. Now the font size is not going to be as big. We don't want it to be quite so big. So maybe here we could do like, remember it's going to be based on the original size that's in its immediate descendant if I'm using M, so it'll be based off of this 1.15 as the standard size. So I'll bump it up from that. And let's just say instead of 2, let's just see what 1.5 looks like. And I don't think that I want this to be uppercase. Let's just see what that looks like. I'll just comment this out just in case I decide that I want to change my mind. We also want that to be centered, and padding in this case is going to be different. We want the padding to be on the bottom, so here we're going to do 0, 0, and then 1M. Okay, let's save that and let's do a peek here, refresh, and you see that it puts the padding down below, and we're okay up here. Now this page ID, it did not capitalize it. I typed it in all capital letters, so if I didn't want that there, if I wanted that in lowercase, I would actually need to go into my HTML where it says page ID, and I would need to change that. If it made if it made a difference to you, you would need to change that here and then refresh again and see that it actually does change it. And so you might, be happy with this. Again, like we can always go back and change this, but this is a good starting place and you're starting to see it begin to take shape. Okay, and the other thing too that you could do if you wanted is you could also put it like a text shadow on the banner text, right, in the heading levels if you wanted. So what we can try here is, let's go down in the H1 and let's say text shadow. There are some different positions within the text shadow. The first offset is going to be the horizontal offset. So a lot of times I'll do 0 because that is like having a spotlight on the top of the object so that it goes straight down. There's no angle on the horizontal offset axis. That way I don't have to keep track of, what degree it's being cast off to the side. The vertical axis, I usually try not to do, say, more than like 2 pixels. That's just so that I can have a shadow that drops down beneath it. And then the blur radius, I like to keep it kind of close in. Let's just try that. And then for the color, you could do RGB, which is a solid color, or you could do an RGBA like this. And then inside of the parentheses, I'm going to do black. All right, so it'll be 0, 0, 0. That would be 0 for red, 0 for green, and 0 for blue, meaning there's no light whatsoever coming through any of those channels, meaning that it's going to be black. And then you put your last comma, and this is for the alpha or the transparency, so you could do like 0.5, so for like 50%. So let's save that and let's just see what happens. We take a peek, let's do a refresh, and you can barely see it. It's not very obvious. If we make it a lot stronger, let's make it 90%. Maybe you can see it better. Okay, and you start to see it just very, very subtly. You could also have that be white if you wanted, just to give you some idea. I don't necessarily think that I'm going to like it for what I want, but let's just say that you do it at full brightness, and that's 255 for each channel. All right, each color channel, hit refresh, and you see it starts to give you like a glow, right? But that gives you some idea of some of the things that you can do, right? So let's go back to 0, 0, and 0. And you could also, if you want to put the number 1 here, that means 100%. We can do that again. And then if you wanted it to be a lot starker, stronger, you could also change the offset and change the blur value. So let's say like if we did 5 and say 10, for instance, save that, go up here, hit refresh, you can start to see that it becomes a lot darker and deeper in the shadow, okay? And that's because it's on a dark background. Of course, it'd be a lot heavier if it were down here, but maybe you want that kind of subtlety, right? So I don't think that I want it actually to be quite that obvious. Let's do this maybe at like 8 and 4 or something like that, and then we'll drop this down to like 90%. So we'll do 0.9, save that, and we'll come over here for a refresh. Yeah. So and if you get confused and you don't have something, if you're not using Dreamweaver, it doesn't prompt you for the different coordinates here, you can go do a Google search for CSS text shadow generator, and there are lots of them out there that'll help you generate the shadow that you want with sliders and things like that. Now, so if I kind of like that, you might go, okay, well, what about the H2? Let me just show you something. If I were to take this and copy this, actually, I need to do this, copy. And if I were to come and put it here inside the entire banner, let me just show you something. If I hit save and I hit refresh over here, what happens is that it goes on everything, all text that's in there, including these links, which you may not want. So if you like having the text shadow on your links, then you can leave it on the parent of the entire section banner, and because it's text related, it cascades down to all of its descendants that happen to be text. But I don't want that to be cascading to all things, including links, so I'm going to cut that out. And then I'm going to come back down here to my H2, and I'm going to add that. And I think I've decided I don't want that to have a text transform of uppercase, so I'll get rid of it and hit save. And let's go back here and hit refresh. And I like not having it personally. Now, one of the things that you might also, sort of wonder is what happens if my text ends up being so long that it happens to wrap? Well, one of the things that I can show you is, first of all, let's right click this and we're going to inspect it. And I am now using the Google Chrome Inspector, okay? And we could play around with it, and you can see also now if I dock it on the right side, my Chrome Inspector, I can dock it by changing it here with these three little dots. I could put it on the bottom, right? I can go back here to my Chrome Inspector, I can put it back off to the right or to the left or whatever. All right, and then by doing that, I can actually force it to be a lot narrower, and as I drag this, you'll notice right up here where I was just circling with my mouse, you'll see that as I'm dragging, it starts to show the actual current width, which is kind of nice. So I can say, all right, well, 320, for instance, is about as small as you'll ever get for modern-ish, even for like older phones, like iPhones that are as old as like a 5C, the old iPhone 5s, they are 320. Okay, so that's kind of how it would look. And if you really wanted to test it in the Chrome tester, you can click on this little mobile view button, and you could even type, actually, you can't type, but you can see, what it would look like at different sizes. You could say iPhone 6, you could look at different sizes, right? These are just the kind of common ones. iPhone 4, that's a 320 size. So you can see what it's going to look like. And you can see how it's going to scroll. You see the little dot, it turns into a gray dot, and it gives you like the inertia style settings that you would get with gestures. And you can also see that now I don't have those hover states. So that's really important to remember also when you're testing, is to make sure that you're not relying on hover states for interactive cues that are absolutely critical to the usability of the piece, because on a mobile device, you're not going to get hover states. All right, so just remember that. Remember to test it this way. The other reason I'm saying that is because if I look at where it says site ID banner and it wraps to H1, I need to make sure that I'm okay with this line height for the wrapping, and I think I am. I could change it if I wanted to increase the line height just a little bit. I could come over here, and while I have the H1 over here selected, I could come over here in the styles and I could add line height just to test it, because this is only live, it's not going to actually save it. I could make it like 1.5 em and see what happens, and that's increased a little bit. That might be too much, like 1.25 em. That might give me a little bit more breathability. If I were to just leave it alone at 1 em, that's what it would look like if I wanted to do 1.1 em. 1.1 em actually might be kind of nice. It gives me just a little bit more space in between without being too much space. So I might just decide to take this and copy it. I'm going to take it out of mobile view by clicking that again. I'm going to go over here to my Dreamweaver, and for my H1, I am going to add line height right after font size, like that. Save it, and then I can come back over here, refresh, and then if I test it, I can pull this closed, and you can see that it actually does start to do the wrap, which is good. Okay. All right, I think that'll do it for now, and then we'll move on to the navigation for the next section.